Ahoy and welcome everyone to my electric fan conversion video. I'm going to be converting my 91 Ford F-150's manual clutch fan over to this electric fan that I picked up from the pick and pull. I'm going to be using this fan controller that I picked up from American Volt. It came with a couple other items in the packaging that I'm going to be using. But yeah, this parts list is by no means all of the stuff that I use for this conversion. There's tons and tons more. It's really hard to put everything in the initial video, but you'll see as we go through the video everything that I'm using to make this conversion happen. It's quite a long video, so please bear with me. There's just tons of stuff that I did. It's kind of an in-depth video of everything that we're going to get done to make this conversion happen. Let's get started by testing out these fans that I picked up from the pick and pull. These fans had 4 wires to each fan, and that is typically from like the manufacturer, so you can have fan speed control on the vehicle. I'm only going to be using the power and the ground wires for each of these fans, so you just gotta wire it up and test each of the wires and make sure that you get power and ground. Typically, obviously the black wire is ground, and then you just gotta find what other wire manufacturer made to be the power wire. So just give that a few tests. Plug it into a battery if you have one on your car, or just a random battery that I had. That's what I'm using to get these going, just to make sure that they work. All right, let's get going. These are the fan clutch removal tools that you are going to need. These are specifically made for the Ford fan clutch. It's really simple. Let's get into that into the next part of the video. All right, so we have our fan removal tools here. Each of them comes with a 1/2 inch opening for a 1/2 inch socket. I have 2 breaker bars here that I use to help me with this. You really only need the one on the smaller tool here to hold down the bolts while you get the fan clutch nut off of there. So you're going to be using your long tool, and that's going to go right around the fan clutch nut. It fits right in there. It's pretty simple. That is going to move your crankshaft. It's going to move your belt. So the other tool you can connect to your breaker bar, and that's going to hold down the fan clutch bolts so that you can break the nut loose on the fan clutch. There we go. Now that we have that nut loosened, we're going to be going from the driver's side to the passenger side. It's a right-handed thread, so yeah, just put the tool on and go from the driver's side to the passenger side, and that will loosen it up. It makes sense if you're looking at it the way we are. Just get going on that. If you need to, you can hold down the belt as well. That would kind of give you a little bit less movement if you don't have the bolts held down with the other tool. All right, so to give ourselves a little bit of clearance here, we definitely don't want the fan to drop. It's just full metal. It's super heavy. We don't want it to mess up any of the radiator fins. So if we loosen up our fan shroud now, we can get some easier access into that fan clutch to help us get that out of there without any gouging issues on the radiator. Now we can lift our fan out of there. We can also get our fan shroud out of there and see how much space we have for our electric fan to fit in there. We definitely don't have as much space as you'll see on some of the V8s like the 5.0 or the 5.8. With those ones, you get tons of space in there to work with. Hopefully the electric fan that we got is thin enough that we can miss any of the moving components on the belt system. All right, it is time to test our electric fan to see how it fits. So I measured this. It is about 28 inches. The radiator area that we're trying to fit is also around 28 inches. They're just centimeters off of each other. The old fan that I had in a previous video actually was only 24 inches, so it wouldn't cover the entire radiator. And I want to make sure that we have, the most efficient system. So I want to make sure we cover the entire radiator. So 28 inches is what you're looking for this specific model. All right, let's get this fit in here and see how it does. There are some pieces that protrude from the serpentine belt system, like the water pump bit that is normally connected to our fan clutch. That the threaded part sticks out just a little bit, so you want to make sure that we clear that with our electric fan, because we don't want that rubbing against the electric fan and messing anything up there. Once we get it in here, you'll see it's just kind of a little hard to see on the video, but the fan fits in almost perfectly. On one side it will fit flush, but then the other side it just is a little too long, and it creates this gap in between the radiator and the fan shroud. So that is something that I want to fix. I want to kind of shave that down a little bit and see if I can make that fan fit in there perfectly snug on both sides. All right, so I am pulling out my handy Dremel with a little sandpaper attachment. I'm just going to be going on this fan shroud, and I'm just going to thin it out little by little to see if I can shave off just the little centimeters that I need to make this fan fit perfectly inside that radiator. Once it gets shaved down to a area that you feel like is going to fit, go ahead and just give it a little test, put it back in there, see how it fits. Whenever you feel confident that that is going to fit in there nicely. For me, I wanted to get this radiator fan shroud cleaned up a little bit, so I went ahead and removed the fans from the shroud. That's super duper simple on here. There was just 3 bolts for each of the fans, and then you have the main center bolt that keeps the fan blades attached to the motor. You'll see here, it just pops right out, and then you can get the fan motor detached from the shroud. While the fans are out, I'm doing just a little more testing to make sure that it is going to fit in there without there being any gaps between my radiator fins and my fan shroud. When I am happy with that, I went ahead and gave it a wash, just a little rinse off, and now it is time to get our motors and our blades reattached to the fan shroud, and then we can get this baby installed. All right, now that the motors are back installed with the fan blades on the shroud, it is time to get our wiring soldered up. So I picked these up. These I think are generally for trailers or something like that. Got them off of Amazon. Nice 12 gauge wire. It's the same gauge as the fan motors have, so I want to make sure we have consistency there. I only am going to be using, like I said, the ground and the power wire. So it's just a 2-wire setup here. I'm going to forget about the other 2s. I'm not going to be regulating the fan speed or anything like that. So I'm not going to cut off those wires, but I'm not going to be using them. You can kind of just tape them to the side, however you want to do that. This wire is just, it's 12 gauge. It's not the thickest, but dang, my soldering iron was just not loving how thick this wire was. Just really terrible solder. So please don't pay too close attention to that. It worked, and I made it work, and I'm happy with it. It's just maybe get a heavier duty soldering iron if you're going to be using kind of thicker gauge wire. But yeah, throw on some heat shrink sleeves, clean this up, make it look presentable in your engine bay, however you want to do that. Just make sure you get that power and the ground wire connected to our new connectors. All right, once we are done with that, we can test out our fans again, just make sure those connections were secure. We'll grab our battery back and let's just make sure that each of these fans works as it should so that we can get this fan installed into the truck. Alrighty, now we can get this fan fitted into our engine bay. It lines up really well with our radiator now. Let's just get this pushed in here and then we can start drilling new mounting holes. So the aluminum radiator bit is just super duper easy to drill into. I'm just gonna kind of make progressively larger holes until I get something that'll fit a bolt, a good size bolt for mounting. I also drilled some little rubber bushings in there to kind of just give it a little bit of gap, but that fits really well with our bolts. So let's get those installed, and then from there we can get the bottom area secured, and that should be good in mounting our fan to the radiator. There we go, we got our spacers in there. That is good. It's very secure up top. On the bottom, I used some Harbor Freight grade zip ties. I'll probably come up with a better mounting solution on the bottom in the future. For now, it'll work. It'll hold everything in place, and it is actually really secure in there. Now we can focus on getting our upper radiator fitting assembled. This has two main components. One of them is our temperature sender for our controller, and the other one that needs to be threaded in there is the temperature sender for our autometer gauge that's in the cab. Besides that, there also needs to be a ground wire attached to it as well, but you'll see how we put that on later. So let's get these brass pieces taped up and threaded in there, and once we're done with that, we can focus on getting that into our upper radiator hose. Before cutting into our radiator hose, we want to make sure that there's not coolant in the line, so I'm going to be opening up the petcock valve and we're going to be draining out some of the coolant that is in there. I have a hose attached to the petcock line, so once I release that, it'll let some coolant out into our distilled water can, and then from there we can cut into our upper radiator hose and get that prepared for our fitting. All right, now we have the coolant drained out of our upper radiator hose area. My hose cutters are in a different location, so I'm just using some regular old scissors to get through this. There's not wire or anything in the upper radiator hose, so it's not anything you have to really work too hard to get cut. Just make sure it's nice and straight because you don't want there to be any, big gaps in there for the fitting. Went ahead and tightened those up, and then I grabbed a socket and made sure that they were nice and snug. Just don't want any radiator fluid coming out of there. But once we get that done, we are good to go there. And now we can start focusing on the next part, which is installing the controller and wiring. We want to make sure we place this in an area that's not near the exhaust. Our exhaust on this engine is pretty low, so it's kind of, we're not going to put it right near there. You just want to make sure this thing doesn't overheat. There's an area near the smog pump that does get pretty warm, so I kind of want to keep it away from that smog pump exhaust there. I'm thinking as close to the battery as possible because I do have some connections that need to go to the battery, so getting it close there is not too bad, and it doesn't really get all that warm right there near my ignition or my battery. All right, let's get these wires unraveled. So we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wires that need to go somewhere. 2 of those wires go to our fan 1 and fan 2. We have a power wire, there's a ground wire, and then there is the longest black wire that goes around to that piece that we just installed. That's going to be our temperature sending unit. And then finally we have 2 wires. We have the green one and the yellow one. The green one is going to be for our air conditioning control, and that's going to turn on when our air conditioner does. And then the yellow wire is our ignition. It's going to turn on the system when the ignition turns on. It's a signal wire. It'll send 12 volts to the controller. So I've decided to put the controller right here next to the battery. It's not in a position that's going to get crushed or anything if we close the hood down. It is upside down, but I mean, it is a little bit easier for me to see when I'm looking at the numbers. I can just kind of turn into it and I can see all of the numbers that I need to. I think it's a good option having it upside down right here. Now that I have that done, we can get these wires kind of placed out here. I'm going to be focusing first on getting my power wire. That will be right to the battery, which is perfect. It's just right there. It should be a really simple connection. I just need to grab a terminal so I can get it attached to my wires right there. Now's a good time. I can start disconnecting my battery bits. So get the ground off there and then get the power off, and then we could start connecting these wires. All right, I have some terminals that I'm going to connect to our positive side of the battery. Just got to find the right size. But once you do, then you can just, however you want to do it. I just cut mine and then crimped them onto these terminals. Nothing super crazy, just it's pretty easy. I like to use heat shrink for any of these terminals that I create. I just like the nice clean, transition from the wire to the terminal. These terminals are crimped on by a little hammer system that I got off of Amazon. It's a pretty neat tool. It works really well with this system and it creates a really nice crimp on those wires. Once we got that finished, we can go ahead and connect it to our power. And there we go. We have our first wire completed. Now we can start focusing on the next one, which is going to be our longest wire that is going to wrap around the back of the engine and go to our temperature sending bit that we were working on earlier. We're not going to be plugging this in yet. We just want to wire it around, make sure that it's in a good position to plug into there easily. Make sure as well that it's not super tight, but you don't want it to be dragging or drooping down, because right below there is your exhaust and you don't want it to touch that at all and overheat it, and then you have to figure out a new connection there. So go ahead and just make sure that it's not dropping or drooping down in that area. We have, let's see, 2 fan wires that we still need to connect. We have our ignition and our AC wires we need to connect. And then we also have our ground. Up next, I'm going to be working on the ground wire. There's tons of different areas on this side of the engine that we can ground it to. I'm just going to be going simple. I'm going to be going right to the base plate of our ignition right there. I have a wire already set up, and it makes it super easy for me to crimp that on there. And then I can just use a little O bit and I'll connect it to the base there, and that gives me a ground really close to my controller. That is perfect. All right, next up on the wiring, we still have our AC and our ignition. We're going to hold off on those for now. We're going to get our fan control wires done next. Those are thicker wires. They're about 12 gauge. So I picked up a roll of 12 gauge wire that I'm going to be using for this. Like I said earlier, my soldering iron isn't really all that heavy duty, so getting through that 12 gauge was just kind of a difficult task for it. If you want to pick up a heavier duty soldering iron, that's probably going to be easier for you to get this thing done. It took me a while just to even get the wires warmed up. All right, so the next part of the video is I'm just going to speed through as fast as I can. If you need to slow it down, I mean, YouTube lets you go on there and slow it down so you can see every single thing that I do. Please don't pay too close attention to the actual soldering, but if you just need like a in-depth view, go ahead and slow the video down so you can kind of see all of the steps that I'm doing. But I'm just connecting the wire to my orange and my blue wires. One of them is for fan 1 and then one of them is for fan 2. Fan 1 is going to be the initial fan. It turns on first, and then fan 2 will turn on after a 9-second delay after fan 1. So that is how you're going to wire it up. You decide how you want to do it. My fan 1 is going to be the one connected closer to the upper radiator hose inlet, and then fan 2 will be on the other side. That's just how I have it set up. You could do it however way you feel like it's best for you. While getting everything soldered in, you want to just, kind of position everything how you're going to have it. You don't want it to hit any of the moving belt parts. You want to have it out of the way. You also want to make sure that it's long enough that it's going to reach both of your fan wires. So just kind of move things around, figure it out. Like I said, you can slow the video down so you can see how I do that, but yeah, not too difficult there. The two wires that we have, fan 1 and fan 2 wires, are both power wires. So they go from the battery to the controller, and then the controller will let it go through to the fans. So those are both power, it's 12 volts. We still need to ground both of those wires. So I created kind of like just a longer ground wire, and I put a little V on it so that we have two wires coming from it. And then I found a place to ground that to, and that is going to be part of our wire loom to the fans to make sure that we have both power and ground to each fan. Because I'm using the same wire color, sometimes this can get a little confusing. If it does, just grab your multimeter and test out the continuity for the wires and just see what's leading where. That's really helpful to make sure that you don't attach something to the wrong wire accidentally. right, we are finally good to go there. We got everything soldered. Let's get our connections set up so that they are connected to our fan. Once we have that, we can tape up everything if it needs it. Just grab some electrical tape and make sure that everything is closed up nice and snug. And then from there, we can grab some zip ties and make sure that our wire loom is connected to the shroud properly. We don't want it getting in the way of the moving parts or the belt that are going to be going when the engine started. So grab some zip ties and make sure that is secured snugly. Finally, we have our last two wires that need to go somewhere. First, we have our yellow ignition wire. That is going to be going through the firewall into the cab. I already have quite a few connections in there that turn on when the ignition does, so I'll just tap into one of those with that sender wire. The other one is going to be our AC wire. That wire, when it gets any 12-volt signal, it tells the fans to just turn on. It is made to turn on when the air conditioning does, because if you're at a stoplight or if you're just parked in idle, you want to make sure that you have airflow going when your air conditioning is on. I am actually going to be splitting this wire into two parts. One of them is going to be going to my fan compressor to turn on when it does. The other one is going to be going in the cab with me, and I'm going to be connecting it to a switch so that I can turn on the fans anytime I want, just in case there's any issues. I want to have manual control over those fans to make sure that I can get them on if needed. So the first step in this is going to be drilling a hole through our firewall. I have these little rubber grommets that I use for this specific application. There's already some wires from a different gauge going through the firewall, but that's kind of maxed out with wires. So I'm going to be creating a new hole, and I'm going to be using these rubber grommets to make sure that there's not any wires that are rubbing against the metal. They're super useful in this application specifically. I'm using my step drill bit here to get a hole the right size for this grommet. Once we get that installed, this is what it looks like, and now is ready to start putting wires through into the cab. So let's get those wires prepped and ready to get in there. All right, so we're going to need to lengthen this signal wire into the firewall. So I had some 18 gauge just laying around in the garage. I'm going to be using that to solder on to our connections, and then we'll go around the back of the engine and into the firewall. So let's get those soldered on, and then we'll go from there. All right, now that we have plenty of wire to work with, I generally don't like my wires to be super exposed to the elements of the engine bay, so I like to use this braided sleeve. I picked it up off Amazon like a year or two back, but I've used it tons just to keep the wires protected and unexposed. It's super simple to use. You just push your wires in there, and then it's kind of a process just having to get the wires pushed in there. It takes a while, but just stick with it. After you're done with that, I like to put a little bit of shrink tube on the ends. That way you have a nice clean finish. Now that we have that braided sleeve protecting our wires, we're going to need to probably 3/4 of the way cut into the sleeve. We want to find our blue signal wire because we're going to want to tap into that. Part of it is going to be going into the firewall so that we have our manual control, but the other part is going to want to come out, and that's what's going to attach to our air conditioning compressor so that when the AC turns on, the fans also turn on and help that system run more efficiently. I'm using a pick here just to try to get that blue wire out. I want enough slack so that I can cut it, and then I'll get 2 wires off of it, and then we'll go from there. Normally, I would just solder a Y connection at the point that I'm cutting, and then just have a signal sent to my switch and a signal sent to my compressor, and then one sent over to the controller. In this case, we don't want to do that because we're going to have power going to our switch, 12 volts of power, and we're also going to have 12 volts of power going to our compressor. We don't want to accidentally turn our switch on and send a signal to the compressor that it needs to turn on. We want to have some separation here. So in this case, we're going to be using a diode. The diode has 2 inputs and 1 output, and what the diode does is it makes sure that the 2 inputs don't interfere with each other when each of them is receiving power. So we're not going to be affecting our compressor accidentally when we flip our switch, and vice versa. So we're going to prep our endpoints here, we're going to crimp on our terminals, and then we can get those connected to our diode. And we'll be good to go to start routing stuff into the engine bay, and then we can start connecting the other wire to our AC compressor. Let's get going with that. Now that we have our connections made to our diode, we can start to run our firewall wire into the firewall. I like to use my pick for this. I will use electric tape, and I'll tape the end wire to the pick, and then I'll kind of use that to push through into our grommet. And then from the other side, we can pull it through the rest of the way. I pushed it through with the pick from the inside of the engine bay, and now I'm using some pliers, and I have a little bit of meat here to grab, and then I could just grab that through the rest of the firewall and pull it on through. I'm going to take a brief pause from our signal wire just to get these other connections done really fast on our upper radiator hose fitting. We have 3 connections that need to be made. I already did the ground wire. That one's super duper simple. Just find a grounding point and connect it to the fitting. The next one is going to be our temperature sending unit for our auto meter gauge. That one you just connect up there into the sending unit. I already had a wire coming out from the firewall. It goes to my gauge inside the cab. And then the last one is the American Volt temperature sending unit for the controller. That one is just plug and play. You just plug 2 of the connections, one into the wire and then one into the sending unit, and you are good to go with those. Tighten everything up, and now we can continue to the inside of the cab where we have our 2 signal wires that we need to connect up. We're on the inside of the cab now, and we are looking for our 12 volt ignition wire, something that when the key is off It is not hot, it is not 12 volts, but when we turn the key and the ignition on, it will go hot, it'll give us 12 volts. That's what we're going to be tapping into for our manual switch and for our ignition wire that's going to go to the controller. So grab your multimeter, test around and find something like that. That's what we're going to be tapping into. I found one here on the brown wire that I have. That's connected to some of my gauges that I use to turn on when I turn the ignition on. So I'm going to be cutting into these and I'll make a solder connection for both the ignition switch and for our manual fan switch. Now that I have that connection made, I can start figuring out where I want to put my manual switch. Now, this is something you really don't have to do for this project. It's something I want to do because I want to have more control over those fans if something happens, but it's definitely a step that is not really necessary for this. The AC control and the temperature control are going to be just fine. I want to have just a little bit extra control, so I'm putting this switch in. It's super simple. If you're already doing all the other stuff, you might as well just put it in. We are done with those, so let's get our panels put back on, and we are all good to go inside the cab. That is all the connections that need to be made to turn the controller on, and now we can actually test our manual switch to see if the fans are going to turn on. Perfect, fan 1 is on, and fan 2 will have a 9-second delay, so we can wait, and there it is, perfect. Our fan 2 is also on with our manual switch, so we know that is good to go. Let's go turn the switch off, and then we'll see if our fans turn off. switch is off, and there we go. Our fans have stopped. Fantastic. That is exactly what we're looking for. Now we can finish up with our other connection to the AC compressor. Before we get the truck started, we want to remember that we did take out some coolant earlier, so we want to make sure that we put more coolant in and we bleed the system just to make sure that there's no air bubbles or air pockets in the system. We want it to run as efficiently as possible when we turn it back on. So let's get that done really fast, and then we can continue with our AC compressor cable. All right, this is the last wire that we need to connect. So we are going to be tapping into our AC compressor. The AC compressor has two wires that go into it, a power and a ground. That's what we're going to be tapping into, the power wire, so that when the compressor turns on, our controller knows, hey, the AC is on. We want to make sure the fans are going. This is good, especially if you're at like a stoplight or if you're just idling for a while. If the AC is going, you want to make sure that there's airflow going through the system. So there is one connector that attaches to your compressor. You want to pull that off. One is a power, one is a ground. Mine was super dirty. It was hard to tell which one was which. All you have to do is grab your multimeter, turn the car on, turn the AC on, and then probe and see which one is getting 12 volts. That's the wire that we're going to be tapping into. Now that we've found our 12 volt wire that we're going to be tapping into, I'm going to be using these T-tap connectors. I typically don't like to use these clips. However, I don't want to cut this compressor power wire. I'd rather just tap into it easily. We're just trying to get a signal and send it to our controller. To make this connection, all you have to do is grab your clip, wrap it around the 12 volt wire, use some pliers, and then just press it on there, and it should make a secure connection. We're going to be testing this with our multimeter after, just to make sure that we're getting that 12 volt that we need. There we go, we got that. Now we can terminate the end of our wire, and we'll put some heat shrink on that, and we can connect it to our tap. Now all we have to do is take our wire, put it onto the tap, and then put our compressor plug back in. From here, we're going to be turning the car on and testing to make sure that when our AC turns on, the fans turn on as well. During my first test of this, I turned the car on, I turned the AC on, and I was looking for those fans to turn on. I did all this, and the fans did not turn on. Wasn't exactly sure what the issue was until I turned the car off and I looked down at the connection that I made. As we put the camera down to take a look at our connection, can you see it? I did not put our plug in properly into the tap, and so it wasn't receiving any signal when our compressor was going. So pull that plug back out, make that connection happen, and we will try it again. Now that we have our connection secure, let's try this again. Turn the car on, turn the AC on, and then let's go check and see if our fans are running. There we go. We got fan 1 going and fan 2 going as well. So we are good to go there. We have our manual switch done. We also have our AC control done. The final part of our video, setting up our fan controller. This is super simple. We have one button to do this all with, but they make it really easy for us. So currently we have the temperature that the engine is running at. We have it at Celsius right now. It's at 13 degrees Celsius. If you push the button once, it'll tell you the point at which the fans will start. So the controller right now is set to 40 degrees Celsius. We want to get this to Fahrenheit because I don't know the metric system. All we have to do to switch it is hold our button down for a long time, and then it'll switch from Celsius to Fahrenheit, something I am more used to working with. We are at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That is what the engine is currently running at. And if we push our button, it has 208 as our temperature that we're going to have the fan start at. Press the button again after the long press, and it'll start scrolling through the different temperature range, and then you could stop it where you want. And at that point, let the engine warm up, and when it gets to that temperature, it'll set the computer there. And then anytime you turn the computer off or if you disconnect the battery, it'll still keep that temperature to turn the fans on at that point. All we have to do now is let our engine warm up. I continually go into the cab to check my autometer gauge and then back out to check my controller temperature to make sure both of those temperatures are similar. Sorry about the way that the LED is filmed through the camera. I think the frames per second is just messing that up. I'm not exactly sure how to fix that yet, but I will figure it out in the future so that when we do other videos with LED screens, it won't have that issue. Off camera, I did change my temperature setting to 195 degrees. That's what the thermostat is set at right now. So we're waiting for 195 degrees on the controller. And once that turns on, our fan should hopefully kick on, and then 9 seconds later, our other one will. There it goes, perfect. Our first one is on, fan 1 and fan 2. Perfect, that fan is now going as well. Our temperature increased, our fans turned on. That will lower our temperature, and then the fans will turn off, and a continual system of not having to have that manual clutch fan constantly going. This is perfect, exactly what we're looking for. Once that is working how we want, you can set your temperature to however you feel like is best and optimal for your engine. I checked the temperature again, and the controller is reading 184 degrees, and at that point the fans are also off now, so that is perfect. So the fans turned on at high temp, the temp gets low, the fans turned off. There we go. That is everything you need to do to replace your manual fan clutch with these electric fans. The American Volt controller made it super duper easy. We'll see how this thing lasts, but it seems very durable. I'm super excited for the result. Thank you very much for watching this video. I really hope it helped you if you're deciding to install an electric fan into your vehicle. Please subscribe. Please like my videos. If you're interested at all in seeing any of my future videos, I am very much looking forward to working on this video where I take an LS engine, building it up and putting it into my 94 Jeep Wrangler. I'm super excited for this project, and I hope you stick around to see it. See you next time.